The Galaxian Confederation prided itself on being the most advanced civilization in the known universe. Their bodies might have evolved to be as fragile as wet tissue paper, and their bones might have the structural integrity of dampened crackers, but their minds? Positively stellar. They had eliminated war, disease, and reality television. Their ships could bend space-time like a cheap spoon at a discount diner. They were, by all accounts, living their best lives. Until they weren't. Ambassador Plex stood before the Grand Council's emergency session, their translucent skin pulsing an alarming shade of mauve. The holographic display behind them showed the last transmission from Colony Zeta 9, a frontier settlement at the edge of Confederation space. Esteemed council members, Plex began, voice wobbling with the gravity of the situation. Colony Zeta 9 has fallen silent after sending this distress signal. Our sensors confirm the presence of void locusts. A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. The void locusts were a semi-sentient hive species that consumed everything in their path: metals, organics, energy signatures, leaving nothing but empty space where thriving planets once existed. The recorded message flickered to life. A panicked Galaxian, dust covering their normally pristine exoskeleton, stared wide-eyed at the camera. They're everywhere. Our defenses are failing. They adapt to every weapon. Please send the transmission cut to static. High Chancellor Ven rose from her floating chair, her four arms gesturing with diplomatic precision. Have we deployed the quantum fleet? Admiral Quix made a burbling sound that translated roughly to "well." About that, he straightened his ceremonial cape nervously. The quantum fleet engaged the locusts 6 hours ago. The locusts ate them. Ships, crews, quantum torpedoes. Everything. The stellar defense grid? Asked another counselor. Assumed, replied Quix. They're evolving at an unprecedented rate. High Chancellor Ven's skin paled to a sickly yellow. Then we have no options left. Plex knew what was coming. Chancellor, surely you don't mean. Contact the Deathworlders, Ven said with finality. The chamber erupted in protests. The Deathworlders humans had been quarantined behind a diplomatic cordon for good reason. They evolved on a planet that should have killed them 1,000 times over, with gravity that would crush a Galaxian, atmospheric pressure that would pop them like bubbles, and radiation levels that were basically a cosmic microwave on high. Worse yet, humans seemed to enjoy it. It's our only choice, Ven insisted over the commotion. Ambassador Plex, you will make contact immediately. Plex's skin cycled through several colors before settling on a resigned gray. As you wish, Chancellor. I'll contact Earth. The way Plex pronounced Earth made it sound like a particularly nasty disease. The diplomatic shuttle hummed pleasantly as it approached the blue-green marble hanging in space. Beside Ambassador Plex sat Lumi, the Confederation's foremost expert on human culture, which was roughly equivalent to being the galaxy's leading authority on performing dental surgery on oneself. Remember, Lumi chirped, adjusting her translator, humans communicate partly through aggressive muscular contractions of their face. They call it smiling. Do not interpret this as a threat display. Anything else I should know? Plex asked, inspecting the special reinforced exosuit designed to withstand Earth's crushing gravity and barbaric atmospheric composition. Yes, they excrete water from specialized glands when experiencing strong emotions. And they consume the fermented excretions of plants and fungi for pleasure. Plex's secondary stomach turned. Revolting. Oh, and they deliberately expose themselves to concentrated solar radiation to modify their external coloration. Why would any sentient being? For aesthetics, Lumi said with the tone of someone who had long ago given up trying to understand. Also, never mention their reproductive processes. They are simultaneously obsessed with and embarrassed by them. The shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, each turbulent bump making Plex question their career choices. They landed at the United Earth Defense Force headquarters, a sprawling complex in what humans called Colorado. As the airlock cycled, Plex activated their gravity compensators and braced themselves. The door opened, revealing a delegation of humans standing at casual attention. Plex's first thought was how unsettlingly solid they looked, dense meat packed onto calcium scaffolding, wrapped in synthetic fibers. Horrifying. A tall human with facial follicle decoration stepped forward. Ambassador Plex, Commander Jack Reynolds, United Earth Defense Force. Welcome to Earth. The human bared its teeth in what Plex desperately hoped was a smile. Commander Plex acknowledged, their translator converting their natural bell-like tones into human speech. Thank you for receiving us on such short notice. Any friend of the stars is a friend of Earth, Reynolds said, leading them into a conference room designed for interspecies meetings. We received your transmission about the void locusts. Nasty business. Lumi interjected, our intelligence suggests they've already consumed 3 star systems and show no signs of slowing. Reynolds nodded grimly as they all took seats around a large table. We've been monitoring the situation. Adaptive hive species with exponential learning capabilities. Conventional weapons would be useless. Yes, Plex said, feeling a flicker of hope. Our most advanced systems were neutralized within hours. We had hoped that perhaps human ingenuity might offer a solution where our technology has failed. Reynolds exchanged glances with his colleagues. We believe we have exactly what you need. A new weapon system? Plex asked eagerly. Better, said Reynolds, pressing a button on the table. We're sending Dave. Lumi's translator glitched momentarily. I'm sorry, Dave. Is that an acronym for Dimensional Artillery Vaporization Equipment or something similar? Reynolds chuckled. No, it's just Dave. Dave Bronson. Works in maintenance. Plex stared, their eye stalks extending in confusion. You're sending a maintenance worker to fight an interstellar threat that has consumed entire fleets? Trust me, Reynolds said with disturbing confidence, Dave is exactly what you need. Perhaps there is a translation error, Plex suggested desperately. When you say send Dave, you mean as an operator for some form of superweapon? No weapon needed, said another human officer. Just Dave. He's got a toolkit, added a third helpfully. Plex's skin turned the deep purple of existential dread. You intend to fight a cosmic horror with a single human and toolkit? It'll be fine, Reynolds assured them. Dave has a knack for these situations. A knack, repeated Plex faintly. You'll see, Reynolds said, standing up. Let's go meet him. As they walked down a corridor, Lumi whispered to Plex, I believe this may be a human cultural practice called pulling our leg. We don't have legs, Plex whispered back. Exactly. Most confusing. Dave Bronson was not what anyone would call impressive. At 5', with a slightly paunchy build and perpetually rumpled uniform, he looked less like humanity's last hope and more like someone who might fix your kitchen sink while complaining about local sports teams. When Plex and Lumi first laid eyes on him, he was halfway inside a ventilation shaft, his legs dangling out as he shouted muffled obscenities at whatever mechanism had earned his ire. Dave, Commander Reynolds called out. Got a minute? A loud clang echoed from the shaft, followed by more creative profanity. Dave extracted himself, revealing a round face with perpetually bewildered eyebrows and a smudge of grease across his nose. Sorry, Commander, Dave said, wiping his hands on his already stained jumpsuit. Trying to fix that coolant leak before a distant explosion interrupted him, followed by alarms. Dave winced. Never mind. Plex and Lumi instinctively retreated several steps, their protective suits whirring in response to their distress. Dave, meet Ambassador Plex and cultural attached Lumi from the Galaxian Confederation, but Reynolds said, as if introducing colleagues at an office party rather than an intergalactic diplomatic meeting. Dave nodded affably. Nice to meet you folks. Sorry about the mess. He gestured vaguely to himself and then to the now smoking ventilation shaft. Reynolds continued, The Galaxians have a situation with some void locusts. We're sending you to help. Dave blinked. Locusts? Like bugs? Space bugs, Reynolds clarified. Planet-eating space bugs. Huh, Dave said, scratching his chin. Don't we have, I don't know, trained soldiers for that sort of thing? People with guns and whatnot? Lieutenant Garcia, who had joined them in the corridor, snorted. Remember the Zorgax incursion? Dave's face scrunched up. That wasn't my fault. How was I supposed to know their sacred temple was actually their spaceship's fuel tank? Or the Mavulian diplomatic crisis? Reynolds added. Again, not my fault that their ambassador looked exactly like the coffee machine. Plex turned to Lumi. I'm not understanding this conversation. Lumi shrugged, an uncomfortably human gesture she had adopted. I believe they are referencing previous incidents where this particular human inadvertently resolved interstellar conflicts. Reynolds nodded. Dave here has a special talent. Things just happen around him. Bad things, Dave corrected. Effective things, Reynolds countered. Remember last year's asteroid mining operation? Dave's face fell. I was just trying to fix the vending machine. And you accidentally activated an abandoned alien defense system that deflected a rogue comet headed for Earth. Still don't know how that happened, Dave mumbled. Plex's eye stalk swiveled between the humans. You are suggesting that this individual, this Dave, accidentally solves catastrophic problems? Pretty much, Reynolds confirmed. And now you wish to deliberately deploy him to our crisis? That's the plan. Dave looked as skeptical as Plex felt. I'm really just a maintenance guy. I fix things. Or try to anyway. Exactly, said Reynolds, clapping Dave on the shoulder hard enough to make Plex wince in sympathetic pain. Pack your toolkit, Dave. You're shipping out in an hour. As Dave wandered off, muttering about overtime pay, Plex turned to Reynolds. Commander, with all due respect, the Void Locusts have destroyed our most advanced battle fleets. They adapt to and consume energy weapons, projectiles, even our quantum-entangled torpedoes. How exactly is one human with a wrench supposed to help? Reynolds smiled enigmatically. Ambassador, sometimes the most complex problems require the simplest solutions. Besides, we've run simulations. And? Dave has a 100% mission success rate. We just don't always understand how, or why, or exactly what happened. Plex's skin turned a skeptical shade of orange. This is preposterous. Maybe, Reynolds acknowledged, but what other options do you have? Plex's skin faded to a defeated beige. He had no answer for that. The Galaxian diplomatic vessel had been hastily retrofitted to accommodate a human passenger, which mainly involved reinforcing one cabin floor and installing what humans called a bathroom, a dedicated space for their various excretory functions that Plex preferred not to think about. Dave boarded with nothing but a duffel bag and his toolkit, looking like he was headed to an unfortunate vacation rather than a potentially apocalyptic confrontation. Nice ship, Dave commented, immediately touching a control panel he definitely shouldn't touch. The lights flickered momentarily. Oops. Please refrain from making contact with the ship's systems, Plex said, trying to keep the panic from their voice. They are calibrated for Galaxian physiology. Right, sorry. Dave promptly stumbled and steadied himself against another panel. A nearby door slid open, releasing a startled maintenance drone that zoomed off down the corridor. Lumi guided Dave to his quarters while Plex retreated to the bridge, already questioning the wisdom of this endeavor. As the ship broke orbit and engaged its dimensional drives, Plex wondered if they had doomed their civilization by bringing a chaos agent aboard their most sophisticated vessel. During the journey, Dave proved to be exactly as disruptive as Plex had feared. He accidentally reprogrammed the food synthesizer to produce only something called mac and cheese, set off the emergency decontamination system 3 times, and somehow managed to improve the ship's fuel efficiency by 12% while looking for the equivalent of a restroom. Is he doing this deliberately? Plex asked Lumi after Dave had wandered through a restricted area and inadvertently fixed a quantum fluctuation they'd been struggling with for months. I don't believe so, Lumi replied. According to my observations, this is simply his natural state. Humans call it having butter fingers, though I detect no dairy products on his appendages. As they approached the Cyrillus system, home to the besieged colony Zeta-9, the ship's sensors began detecting the void locust's presence vast swarms of metallic organisms, stripping nearby moons down to their cores. General Clovix of the Galaxian Defense Force greeted them via hologram, his exoskeleton bearing the marks of recent battle. Ambassador Plex, thank the stars you've arrived. The situation has deteriorated. The locusts have adapted to our phase disruptors and are now consuming our shield generators. What reinforcements have you brought? Plex hesitated. We've brought specialized assistance from Earth. Clovix's eye stalks perked up. The Deathworlders? Excellent. How many warships? What weapon systems have they deployed? Well, Plex began uncomfortably. They've sent 1 human. There was a long pause. 1? Clovix finally asked. Yes. A single human? That is correct. Is it at least one of their elite warriors? A space marine or commando I've heard about in their entertainment transmissions? At that moment, Dave walked onto the bridge, now wearing a jumpsuit with a suspicious burn mark on one sleeve. Hey, are we there yet? I'm starving and your food machine keeps making everything taste like algebraic equations. Plex performed the Galaxian equivalent of a sigh. General Clovix, may I present Dave Bronson of Earth. Dave waved cheerfully at the hologram. How's it going? Clovix's skin cycled through several colors before settling on a mottled pattern that indicated extreme confusion. This is a joke, yes? A human humor ritual before revealing the actual solution? I assure you it is not, Plex said. The human military leadership was quite insistent that Dave was the appropriate response to this threat, Lumi added. Clovix stared at Dave, who was now attempting to scratch his back with a ceremonial Galaxian artifact that was definitely not meant for scratching. We're doomed, Clovix concluded. As they entered orbit around the partially consumed moon where the colony's survivors had established a last defensive position, Plex briefed Dave on the situation. So these bug things eat everything? Dave asked. Yes, they consume matter and energy in all forms, Plex explained. They adapt to weapons within minutes of exposure. Ha, Dave said, thoughtfully chewing on a protein bar he'd produced from his pocket. Sounds like my ex's cat. That thing ate my favorite shoes, my couch, and somehow my Wi-Fi router. Plex didn't understand the reference but pressed on. We'll transport down to the command center. Please follow all safety protocols and... A sudden alarm blared. The ship rocked violently. They've detected us. The navigator shouted. Swarm approaching. Evasive maneuvers, Plex ordered. Prepare the... Dave stumbled as the ship lurched, falling against the navigation console. His toolkit opened, scattering tools everywhere. Somehow, his universal wrench hit exactly the right sequence of buttons to activate the ship's experimental chaotic pattern thrusters, sending them pinwheeling through space in a manner that made even the ship's AI nauseous. Miraculously, this random trajectory took them safely through the swarm to the moon's surface. where they crash-landed not catastrophically but with enough force to send Dave tumbling face first into the emergency beacon activator. The beacon began broadcasting an old Earth pop song at volumes that made the void locusts in the immediate vicinity explode. "Sorry about that," Dave said, picking himself up. "Did I break something important?" Plex stared at the view screen showing the scattered remains of the previously unstoppable locusts. "I don't think so." The surviving Galaxian forces had established their final command center in a reinforced bunker beneath the colony's main research facility. General Klovik stood before a holographic display of the system, showing the swarms of void locusts systematically devouring everything in their path. "They've already consumed 60% of the colony," Klovik reported grimly. "Our weapons become useless after a single engagement. They learn, adapt, and come back stronger." Dave, who had been tinkering with his toolkit while half listening, looked up. "So they're like what metal bugs with a hive mind?" "An oversimplification, but essentially correct," Klovik said. "They communicate through quantum-entangled neural patterns, allowing instantaneous sharing of adaptive strategies across the entire swarm." "Cool," Dave said, not sounding particularly impressed. "Mind if I take a look outside? I work better when I can see what I'm dealing with." Before anyone could stop him, Dave wandered toward an observation port, tripping over a power conduit along the way. The resulting power surge temporarily disabled the bunker's cloaking field, immediately revealing their position to the nearest locust swarm. "Alert! Defensive systems offline," shouted a Galaxian technician. "Swarm approaching. Seal all entrances," Klovik ordered. "Prepare for." "Oh. Oops, my bad," Dave said, attempting to reconnect the conduit. Instead, he accidentally cross-wired it with the facility's waste disposal system. What happened next defied all known laws of physics, biology, and common sense. The facility's septic system backflushed into the environmental control unit, releasing a cloud of what Dave later described as the worst smell since the Great Cafeteria Chili incident of 2047, directly into the approaching locusts. The swarm, which had evolved to consume all forms of matter and energy, had apparently never encountered concentrated septic waste from 3 different alien species plus 1 human. The leading edge of the swarm faltered, their metallic carapaces beginning to corrode from the unexpected chemical cocktail. "Fascinating," muttered Lumi, observing from a safe distance. "They appear vulnerable to organic waste compounds." "No time to study it," Klovik said. "We need to get to the auxiliary control room before." A tremendous crash echoed through the facility as the remaining locusts, now adapted to the septic attack, began tearing through the outer defenses. This way. Klovik led them through a series of emergency corridors toward a more secure section of the bunker. Dave, trying to keep up, slipped on the still wet floor and careened into a laboratory they were passing. His toolkit flew open once more, sending tools skittering across surfaces. His favorite magnetic screwdriver landed inside an active experimental energy containment field, instantly creating a cascading resonance pattern that amplified the field's frequency to exactly match the void locust neural synchronization wavelength. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The nearest locust began to vibrate uncontrollably, their hive-mind connection disrupted by what amounted to the insect equivalent of an ear-splitting feedback loop directly into their collective consciousness. "What did you do?" Plex demanded, watching in astonishment as the locusts began crashing into each other, their coordinated attack dissolving into chaos. "Nothing," Dave protested, trying to retrieve his favorite screwdriver. "That's my lucky screwdriver. My grandpa gave it to me. Can I get it back?" The Galaxian scientists watched in stunned silence as Dave reached into the energy field which should have vaporized his arm and casually retrieved his tool, inadvertently adjusting the field's harmonics in the process. This new frequency propagated through the quantum entanglement network connecting all void locusts, causing a system-wide disruption. On monitors throughout the command center, they They watched as swarms across the system began to exhibit erratic behavior. "They're retreating," Klovic said incredulously. Indeed, the massive swarms were pulling away from the colony, seemingly unable to maintain their collective intelligence under the assault of the modified energy field. "Impossible," muttered a Galaxian scientist. "We've bombarded them with everything from anti-proton beams to quantum disruptors. How could a simple magnetic resonance affect them so dramatically?" Dave shrugged, pocketing his screwdriver. "This thing's never worked right since I dropped it in my fish tank. Makes my TV change channels randomly when I use it at home." Plex's eye stalks extended in sudden comprehension. The quantum flux from improper magnetic alignment, combined with residual organic compounds from the aquatic habitat, created a cascading disruption in their neural network. "Yeah, whatever you said," Dave agreed, now rummaging through a nearby storage unit that clearly displayed warnings in 17 different languages. "Hey, do you guys have anything to eat around here? I'm starving." Before anyone could stop him, Dave activated what turned out to be an experimental terraforming catalyst intended for emergency planetary modification. The resulting reaction created a localized gravitational anomaly that began pulling the retreating locusts into what was rapidly becoming a small artificial black hole. "Take cover," screamed Klovic. The Galaxians scrambled for safety as the anomaly grew, selectively pulling in void locusts while somehow leaving the facility intact, a physical impossibility that the scientists would debate for decades afterward. Dave, completely oblivious to the cosmic miracle he had inadvertently engineered, had found a vending machine-like device and was pressing buttons at random. "Does this thing have anything like coffee? I'm getting a caffeine headache." Through the viewport, they watched as the last of the void locusts were compressed into the anomaly, which then collapsed in on itself with a final flash of light, leaving nothing but empty space where the swarm had been. Did we win?" Plex asked tentatively. Dave, who had finally managed to get the machine to dispense something resembling a beverage, took a sip and immediately spat it out. "Ugh, tastes like liquid mathematics. Any chance we can head back soon? I'm missing taco night at the cafeteria." 1 week later, Ambassador Plex stood before the Grand Council of the Galaxian Confederation, delivering what would become known as the Deathworlder Protocol speech. "Esteemed council members," Plex began, their skin a confident shade of blue, "I am pleased to report that the void locust threat has been neutralized. All swarms across 3 sectors have either been destroyed or have retreated beyond our sensor range." High Chancellor Venn leaned forward. "And this was accomplished by the human weapon designated Dave." "Not exactly a weapon," Chancellor Plex clarified. "Dave Bronson is simply Dave. A maintenance technician who appears to exist in a state of quantum uncertainty where the laws of probability bend around him in ways our science cannot explain." Admiral Quix, now sporting a new ceremonial cape, the previous one having been eaten by locusts, seemed skeptical. "Are you suggesting this human defeated an interstellar threat through a series of accidents?" "Precisely," Plex confirmed. "Furthermore, our scientists have been unable to replicate any of the effects Dave produced. The specific resonance frequency that disrupted the locust hive mind cannot be generated by our most advanced equipment." "Fascinating," murmured a counselor. "And where is this Dave now?" "We returned him to Earth," Lumi interjected. "He was concerned about missing something called the playoffs and requested immediate transport home." "Did he understand what he accomplished?" asked another counselor. Plex's skin rippled with amusement. When debriefed, his primary concern was filing an expense report for his lost tools and putting in for overtime pay. The council chamber filled with the bell-like sounds of Galaxian laughter. High Chancellor Venn raised her 4 arms for silence. "Ambassador Plex, based on your recommendation and the evidence presented, I am formally updating our classification of humanity in the Galactic database." "To what designation, Chancellor?" Plex inquired. "Classification, do not disturb under any circumstances," Venn declared. Humans are to be contacted only in the event of extinction-level threats, and even then, only as an absolute last resort. A wise decision, Plex agreed. I would further recommend a specific subclassification for the human known as Dave Bronson, approach only with planetary evacuation plan. Across the galaxy, word began to spread among spacefaring civilizations. The previously quarantined Deathworlders had a weapon unlike any other, not a device or a fleet, but a single entity called Dave who bent reality through his mere presence. The Vraxul Empire, which had been planning an incursion into Galaxian space, quietly redirected their war fleet away from human-allied territories. The Quantum Collective, an artificial intelligence conglomerate, ran 14.3 million simulations of potential encounters with the Dave, and determined that voluntary shutdown was preferable to such a meeting. On Earth, Dave Bronson returned to his maintenance duties at the United Earth Defense Force headquarters, completely unaware of his new status as the most feared entity in 3 galactic quadrants. His only souvenirs from the adventure were a commendation letter he used as a coaster and a strange magnetic anomaly that followed him around, occasionally causing electronics to play old disco music when he passed by. Commander Reynolds did add a special note to Dave's personnel file: under no circumstances allow access to antimatter containment systems, temporal research laboratories, or the officer's coffee machine. And somewhere in the vast emptiness of space, the remnants of the void locusts shared a new instinctive fear, through their hive mind a terror of a creature that defied understanding, a chaos agent that turned their perfect adaptation against them. They had a name for this fear in their collective consciousness. They called it Dave.